Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the World CX Summit Asia. Right now we're on our final keynote, which is on building a growth culture. Well, we're joined by Johnny Quach, the CPO, CTO, Hostelworld, Ireland. Well, Johnny is somebody who's successful in building successful companies across Germany, the UK, Brazil, Singapore, and Thailand, to name a few. At his current role at Hostelworld, he leads 100 plus streams of cross-functional individuals. So thank you so much, Johnny, for joining us. We couldn't have had a better person to join us towards the end for the keynote. We now request you to please switch on your camera and put your audio on and join us on the main stage and screen.
Hello, everyone. How's it going?
Going great. Thank you so much, Johnny. Hope you're doing great. It's so good to have you towards the final leg of the World CX Summit. Thank you for giving us your time. Over to you.
Absolutely. So let me just kind of set up my share screen.
Sure.
And just let me know when that is working.
Yes, it is. It is.
Super. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is pretty exciting. And I think in a world where it's really hard to travel, it's also just really nice to talk to people from different parts of the world. So thank you for this opportunity. And I think we're going to go right into it. So I'm going to talk to you today about building a growth culture within your company, within your team, within your squad, and within yourself. So quick note about myself and kind of what my core competencies are. So I'm the CPO/CTO of a company called Hostelworld. We're a publicly traded company in the UK. We have office internationally in Shanghai, Sydney, London, Dublin, and Porto. And what I do is I lead a team of product managers, developers, data scientists, customer service employees, and UI UX designers across multiple disciplines. I'm responsible for everything from user experience to customer growth to internal IT audits. So a really wide range of skill sets. And I think as we go through this presentation, it'll be clear why all those kind of functions, which seem quite different, can and should report into this kind of mindset and really think about problems in a very similar way. Before that, I was at a company called AirHelp, which is a Y Combinator company from 2014. Y Combinator is the best incubator for startups in the world. They've produced companies such as Dropbox, Airbnb, Stitch Fix, and many more successful companies. So when I joined AirHelp, it was about 400 people. And by the time I left, over the 3.5 years, we scaled it to 850 people while beating almost every single metric there is. And there I managed product management, growth, data, double the population of the company size, and lots of interesting metrics. And my background is really across really different disciplines, but I apply very similar growth mindset to pretty much every area I manage. And I'll go deep into what that mindset is. So as a quick kind of primer to the concept of growth, Y Combinator, which I mentioned earlier, is a really world-class incubator of some of the best companies in the entire universe. And if you look at and you speak to any of the founders in the last, I think, probably last 8-7 years, one of the biggest regrets of any successful Y Combinator company is that they weren't building a growth team early enough in their career. And I'll explain what that is and when you should actually think about growing it. So if you look at all these companies, right? Facebook to Uber, to Dropbox, Airbnb, they have a few things in common a few things you might know and a few things that you might not know that they have in common. The first bit is they're clearly all very valuable companies, right? The smallest company here is probably Pinterest, and that's evaluated, I think, at $39 billion as of today. And so all these companies are huge companies. They were all very successful, and they're still high growth companies even to today. And the one thing that people don't understand, and I think this is the part in which everyone kind of doesn't have the visibility, is that all these companies achieved growth through design, not accident. And when I say design, I don't mean they designed really interesting UI and people used it. I actually mean they set out and they said, we are going to grow and we're going to implement tactics and build teams and put resources into growing. Now, you might say, well, what is the difference between that and, doing more marketing? Well, the difference between marketing, which is typically referring to traditional advertising channels and things like that, growth is really applying that mindset to every single thing you do as a company. And the best thing I've ever heard about growth is that growth is intentional. It is not something that just happens on its own. It requires the company to care and to put focus and actually to put team and people into this specific thing. So there are many examples, and let's say features and ideas that come out of a growth mindset. So there's kind of these famous cases of certain companies that have come out with super cool features that really gave them that step change in their growth. As an example, Reddit created a button in which the founders would press to generate fake users in the very beginning of their startup, because at that time there were no users on the site. So the founders themselves would create the content themselves. Dropbox created the shared Dropbox get free space. Airbnb used to scrape Craigslist and look for people who were sharing their rooms on there already, and then put that inventory into Airbnb. Yahoo was one of the first companies ever to include a link to Yahoo Mail sign up in every single email that was sent up. Now, the funny thing was, in all of this, you see these examples and you see these outputs of these companies, but this is not the magic sauce. The actual features and the tactics that come out of the companies, this is not the fundamental reason they grow. These are the small samples of things that come out of the companies that you have experienced. But there are many, many, many more things that they've done that have failed or have been successful that you don't see. But all of that is all because of one specific reason. They are intentionally trying to grow, and they put a growth mindset against all these ideas. So growth is an innovation and creativity arms race. And the companies that grow the best are the ones that are most innovative and creative about how they grow. However, most people think of growth as a section, as a team, as a squad, as a metric, but this is incorrect. Growth should be what a company does, because building a company is an innovation and creativity is arms race. So let's define exactly what growth is. So the first thing is, you don't want to build a growth team. What you're trying to get to is you're trying to build a growth culture. This is a very critical difference in terms of thinking about tactics versus thinking about strategy of how your company thinks about all the problems that's trying to tackle. So a growth culture, in simple terms, is this. You want to create a results-driven team that obsesses about scale and urgency. I'm going to go deep into what each of these things mean. So there's 3 points: results-driven, scale, and urgency. So in a company, this is common for anybody who's probably watching this. You have heard sentences like this, statements like this. You've probably been in meetings where there's been tons of discussion about things like this. We need to redesign our homepage because it's ugly. There's a great experience, that's a great experience for our users. Or you might say things like, oh, our translations suck, let's improve them. So these things may be true when you're discussing your product or your company or a project or a campaign. But the problem with these statements is that they do not start at a point in which you're thinking about the results. Instead, you are starting on the solution before really understanding what you are trying to achieve. So let me give you an example of a company that is a growth-focused company, how they would talk about these topics. So a results-driven company, what you would probably hear is, we want to grow our users by X%. That is always the starting statement before any other thinking and any other ideas or features or brainstorms. So if we want to grow our customer base by 15%, so what are the features that would give us 15% more users? Where do you see a drop off of greater than 15% of users? Which language could add more users to our base by 15%? This is critically different than saying, oh, the website is not easy to use, or it's not pretty, or there's typos in the translations. All those statements, which highlight the same problem, do not have a result. And the way you want to always think about the feedback and the ideas and things that you're trying to do and the features you're trying to build is, What is the result that you're trying to roll up into? This is the critical part of thinking about ideas and having discussions about roadmap, features, blah, 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 blah. You must start with the overarching metric that you are trying to move. Another kind of example of what you might hear in a typical company is, we need to fix our app, we have a low app rating. This funnel step is confusing, we need to improve it. Or we need to fix this typo. The problem with those statements is that when you think of a problem, everybody thinks of bugs being bigger than features. And everybody treats bugs and issues on their site or product as some highly critical problem. But what people should not do is treat, things that are not correct in the same manner or in a different manner than what you would treat any other project you would pursue. As an example, you might have a low app rating, but the question you should ask yourself is not, how do I increase my app rating? It is, how much more can we grow if we had a perfect app rating? Now, you see many companies obsess over their app rating, but very few companies can actually draw a correlation between their app rating and their growth. And many companies don't even try to do that. They just assume if you have a better app rating, your company grows. But this is not true. There have been many successful companies, and most successful companies start out with a pretty bad app rating over the last 10 years. I think that's changed now. We've just gotten better at hacking the app rating. But if you go back 10 years ago, there are many companies with 100 million users plus that have less than a 3-star rating. And yet at that time, people could not correlate the two metrics. Now, I'm not saying app ratings are important. It's just that you need to always kind of ground yourself in the idea of the scale of the problem and the scale of the impact the thing you're working on. A second example, how many users would we recover if we improve this funnel step? It's a simple change, but from saying this funnel step is confusing, we should fix it, to how many users would you recover if you fixed it, makes all the world of difference. Because that mindset, not only does it give you a crystal clear thing that you're trying to achieve, it also tells you if the thing you did actually didn't work. So if you say this funnel step is confusing, let's fix it. The issue is that if you did, quote unquote, fix it, you would not actually check anything to see if it was actually fixed. Instead, if you started with, well, how many users will we recover if we fix this funnel step? And you might say 5% or 10%. What you can actually do is after you, quote unquote, fixed it, you can check if it was 5 or 10%. And what you realize is most things of problems and most problems that you fix don't actually have that much impact. So giving your team the ability and the cadence in which they constantly reevaluate the decisions they make in the past is critical. But for you to do that, they have to define the thing that they want to impact before they work on something. So regarding to the typo thing, so either A, fix it now, or don't. It's just more expensive to have a meeting about it. And this is about a team thinking about the amount of effort it takes to do everything. They think about the amount of time they spend in meetings. They think about the times they spend grooming a roadmap. They think about the times in which they're preparing presentations. And they always ask themselves, is this really the best use of my time? And is this the most efficient way to build more growth? And sometimes people spend more time discussing if they should fix or do something than the actual time to fix or do it. That's actually very, very, very common in a company. So a company that really gets and understands how growing works, they think about every single problem, every single option, every single project, every single person in the sense of scale in comparison to all the other things they should be working on. Another example is, you'll hear this in companies all the time. We need a process for XYZ. And this is a very common one. How long does it take to build this feature? And a final one, which is, let's run an A/B test and let it run for 2 months to see the results. So a sense of urgency is something that's actually quite hard to find when hiring people. And a sense of urgency is one of the most critical personality traits that you're looking for when you're trying to build a growth culture. And sense of urgency typically comes from people who have tried to start a company, even if it's 1 or 2 people in the company ever. But when you try to build a company, you truly understand that, oh my God, everything needs to go a lot faster, because that is the one advantage you have as a company trying to grow. So what I always say is that you want to just have enough processes. So you're not talking about processes, right? So you just want to have enough structure where the team is not confused, but you don't want to overly structure everything, because the time and effort it takes to create a process, implement it, and track it is actually significant. And you want to give that time to really thinking about your users, your growth, and your strategies. So instead of asking how long would it take to build this, what you should be asking is, we have 3 weeks. What is the closest thing that we can build to this that would deliver the same kind of impact? That is a very different mindset than how long would it take to build this. You might get an answer like 6 months to a year, but what you're looking for is you're trying to time bound things. So if we only had 3 weeks, what could we do? And maybe you can't build the full feature, but you might be able to build the core piece of it that matters. So always stripping all the nonsense and getting straight to the point is a clear sense of urgency that you need to instill in your team. Finally, instead of running a huge A/B test, something that might be cheaper and faster is actually just sending out a survey to a bunch of your customers. And that in itself might actually give you the data points you need to make a decision already. So anything that you feel would take months or a year even to get to a result is poor. And whenever you're trying to answer a question or make a decision, your goal is to make the decision as fast as possible in the scale of the problem. The bigger the problem, the longer you take. But what I often find is people take too long to make decisions on simple things and small things, and then they make really fast decisions on very big things. So you always want to be thinking about the sense of urgency matches the scale of the thing you're trying to do. Now, growth, once again, is not a product management discipline. It's a company mindset. Product management is my core competency, but what I've seen is with any company, the ones I've worked at as well as other ones, having it as a company mindset is truly powerful. So I'll give you an example. Forget product management, forget technology, forget marketing, forget growth. Think about departments in your company that are unrelated to that. Imagine if your HR team ran experiments and ran A/B tests in their recruitment emails to people on LinkedIn. That would be a very powerful practice for a recruiter, because recruiting is, like user growth in a sense. You're trying to capture as many users as possible, put them into your job funnel, and then find the best candidates. So if HR ran experimentation on the subject headlines of the messages they send on LinkedIn or cold emails in their email outreach, you could see tremendous results from this. But most HR teams and most recruitment firms don't do this. What if finance built reporting products? Right now, if you have a finance team, most likely what they do is they send around a bunch of Excel files. That's typically the function, and that's typically the preferred product. But what if finance built charts, built reporting products that automated reports to the right people on certain given days and on certain schedules? What if finance did all that instead of crunch everything in Excel? What if finance leveraged things like Airtable or connected different tools or connected to your DB or automated all the reporting? But finance teams typically don't do this. Typically what they do is they go straight to the DB, export that, put it into an Excel file, and do a bunch of calculations. But this is a very backwards way of working because we have so many tools these days that automate all the data flow in a company. What if your legal team leverage technology? Most legal teams work in Microsoft Word or contracts or things like this, and maybe now they use DocuSign. But what if legal teams only use DocuSign, only use digital assets, and found ways to kind of leverage this so that they reduce the amount of time it takes to close off a decision? And finally, this is where it's really functionally obvious. What if your operations team, so in your company, if you have a physical operations team, thought about the processes and applied a growth thinking to it? So I'll give you some examples of growth mindsets and the results they produce that's unrelated to technology. So there's an airport. This is not the airport in Thailand, but there is an airport. At one point, they would have these really low customer satisfaction scores. So people would get off the plane, they would go to the baggage claim, they would go to baggage claim 1, they would stand there and they would wait maybe 15 to 20 minutes before their luggage came out. So the customer complaints were super high. The customer satisfaction score, which is the thing you care about, was really low. And the complaints were, well, I'm waiting 15 to 20 minutes for my baggage. This is taking forever. Okay. Put yourself in the mindset of an operation manager that owns this area of the airport. You might be thinking to yourself, how do I make how do I make it so that the baggages come out faster than 15 minutes? You might think about getting the plane closer to the baggage claim, or you might think about speeding up the conveyor belt, or you might be, speaking to the guys who are loading it to do a faster job. You might have all these ideas. But in reality, the problem that you're trying to solve is not making the baggages come faster. The problem you're trying to solve is having people not wait 15, 20 minutes. Now, you want to clarify that, because what this airport did was they just moved all of the people who came off the plane. Instead of going to baggage claim 1, they would put them at the farthest baggage claim. So that way, all the people that went off the plane would walk 10 to 15 minutes to the baggage claim, which is on number 4. And by the time they got there, the baggages were already rolling out. But nothing changed in their process. Nothing changed in their operations. The only change they made was think, what is the change that we're trying to impact? It's not making baggages come back faster. It's about reducing customer wait time. So having customers just walk an additional 10, 15 minutes actually gave them the time to pull out the baggages in the right timing, which made all the difference. Because by making this change, this company improved the customer satisfaction score by 25%. And kind of the key takeaway here is the effort was minimal, absolutely minimal, but the impact was significant because they focused on the right problem, they thought about urgency, and they didn't spend a million years thinking about how to improve all their operational details. This man, Malcolm Mclean, which you've probably never heard of, is really interesting. So Malcolm used to drive a truck, and this is when trucks were first invented. That's actually how they looked. And what most of America was transporting goods in these trucks. So what would happen is Malcolm would drive this truck somewhere. Then they would load up the truck. Then when he go to his destination, and then they would unload the truck. Well, that seems pretty straightforward. So Malcolm thought to himself, well, this is pretty annoying because all I do is I keep loading and unloading stuff. What if there was a faster way to unload and load stuff? Okay, so put yourself in Malcolm's shoe. What would you do? Okay, well, I could probably just load faster. I could probably hire more people to load faster. I could hire more people at the drop-off spot to unload faster, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I could also maybe get a faster car. But Malcolm Mclean said, well, why don't I just put an object on the back of my trunk so that I can unload the whole thing at once? So Malcolm Mclean is the inventor of the transport hub that shipping yards use today. Malcolm Mclean is the person who invented the containers that you see on ships and the containers that you see on truck right behind Malcolm. Right there, you can see one. And so what happened was doing this made loading trucks so efficient because you would just drive to the location and the whole thing would just come out of it. He is the inventor of the shipping container. And because of this one invention, of this one efficiency that had nothing to do with people or cars, instead it had to do with the simple change of just loading and unloading the whole thing at once, he created a $430 million company from this simple idea. But this idea transcends technology. Instead, what it does is it thinks about the things that matter: sense of urgency, a scale, and the result you are trying to achieve by understanding what it is you're trying to do at the very beginning. Malcolm Mclean didn't say, I want to deliver items faster. What he said was, I want to get stuff off my truck as fast as possible. And by doing that, by inventing this, he created an empire and a legacy that we still use this damn thing today. One of the most impactful things to ever be done to shipping productivity. And final example, there's a really fancy bike company based in Holland. The name is VanMoof. They sell very expensive electric bikes. For example, this one is 2,000 euros. They ship to about US. They do about 60,000 deliveries to US. They probably do more now, but this was about a few years ago. So VanMoof had a really fancy bike. And what they would do is they would ship these bikes in these big boxes. In the boxes, they would put these fragile stickers all over the box. But the problem was, when they got to the shipping companies would still toss around these boxes, and about, I think it was 60% of all of the products in US shipped damaged. So they put all these fragile stickers on the shipping, and apparently that did not solve anything. Instead, it just, the shipping companies actually ignored it. So what the VanMoof company did was they redesigned the box that the bike was traveling in, And what they did was they created an illustration of a large flat screen TV in which the bike was in. So this would give the impression that the actual box was shipping a TV instead of a bike. And what this simple change did, was that it decreased the damages by almost 80%. So this pretty much eliminated the problem of damaged goods when they're shipping, just by putting an illustration of a TV on the box of a bike. This made all the difference. Now, once again, they could have said, well, let's look for another shipping company. Let's put thicker packages. Let's increase the thickness of the box, or maybe even increase the durability of their bikes. All that stuff is too slow. Instead, a simple change that's very focused on the goal that they're trying to achieve, which is not, can we get bikes to be more durable or can we reduce damages? It's that, can we get the shipping company to have the same respect for this item that we do? Which all it takes is but changing the illustration of the box the thing was shipped in. So significantly, these things have huge impact, right? And you might actually think to yourself, well, what do you do during COVID? What do you do in the period when there's nothing to grow? When everything is going poorly, where the markets are, at an all-time low and unemployment's high and there's just no growth. Well, I think the thing that people don't understand is that every single successful company as of today, every single company has gone through multiple crises that you just don't remember. For example, this is a sample list of every single lawsuit that Uber has been a part of. By now, this list is probably double. Uber faces an existential threat to their existence pretty much yearly at this point. But this company survives constantly. It finds ways to solve this problem because it applies the correct sense of urgency, the results-oriented focus to every function in the company. They've been sued by every city and county and country at this point, and yet today they're still one of the top biggest companies in the entire world. Airbnb, which is considered one of the best companies in the world, has a huge amount of customer love. Airbnb has had a huge amount of lawsuits as well. And as you can see, the lawsuits actually keep growing, not shrinking. So once again, every single company that is successful today goes through multiple crises. But because they think about growth and they apply to all the key functions, they're able to get past all those issues and all those roadblocks. So don't think that COVID is unique in any way. It's actually a very common thing. And it's a very, very, very common thing that these companies learn how to get past. And Airbnb is a perfect example. A company in travel through to 2020 actually ended up with better results than they ever have. So building a growth culture is critical to your company, not only in your day-to-day, but also in the survival of a huge pandemic scenario. One more small example of a company you might never heard of. There's a company called Candor. What they do is they provide a service where they tell candidates what they should get paid for the job that they're being interviewed for. During the pandemic, what was the biggest problem was that people didn't know what companies were hiring and what companies were not. So Candor spun up a small page called Hiring Freezes. And this page would be a simple Airtable that they integrated. So it's a simple table. And what they even did was they allowed the companies themselves to populate it. Are you hiring? Are you not? What's the name of the company? What's the state? Et cetera, et cetera. And so they created this page where they let companies input their own data. And what they saw was they went from pretty much a few hundred users a day to almost 12,000 users a day. So even companies that provide salary information for people interviewing at a time in which no one was hiring was still able to create traction on their site by solving the problem in a low effort way. So small companies, big companies, huge unicorns, startups, all can use this kind of mindset and all can create solutions that get them through some of the toughest scenarios in the history of their lifetime. So I will leave you with one final statement, which is your organization's culture today is defined by your past successful decisions. So if you want to make the change in your company now, it's when you want to see your company in the future is you have to implement this kind of mindset today so you can create successful outcomes, which then set as the blueprint for how you want to think about your company in the future. So finally, I have one favor to ask. There's two QR codes here. The left is a feedback QR code. If you take your phone and you take a picture of that, what it'll do is it'll send you to a feedback form where you can give me feedback about this talk and also give me any additional feedback you might have that I could improve it. And the right one will send you to my YouTube channel where I post videos with very similar thoughts about growth and other things related to product management. So I'll leave this up for about 10 seconds and I'll end my talk.
So, well, time to scan those QR codes and put in the feedback and also subscribe and view the videos on YouTube. Firstly, thank you so much, Johnny. We can keep this, slide with us handy because I have a question from the audience. So let the audience also get enough time to scan. The question from the audience, Johnny, is that in the current state of business, with time and resources shrinking, how do I convince an executive that we need to dedicate time to listen to our customers and resolve any problem?
Great. So I think a common way to ask that kind of question to an executive team, which might be like, hey, we need to spend more time listening to our users, but we don't have enough resources. And the problem, I think, with that statement to an executive is that it does not have an end result that you're trying to achieve. So my suggestion is that you think about that question and that statement as the result as the first part of the statement. So what you might say is, I think we can grow our user base by 10 or 15% if we spend more time listening to our users to understand what are the problems that they want to solve. So what you want to do is you want to just set a very clear goal of what you think the impact of listening to customers is and how that's going to impact the business and why you should do it. Now, I think the problem that you'll likely run into is you'll have a hard time calculating what kind of impact you're trying to achieve. But that's important for you to understand because think about that. If the impact is hard for you to calculate through doing user research, then how would an executive understand it? So spend the time to think about what is the impact that you're trying to achieve through more user interviews, through investing in more resources. And then once you come to that kind of concrete statement, any person that you talk to will understand where you're coming from. Now, from a tactical level, gathering feedback from users is not a high cost thing. There's many ways to do it. You can do it for emails. You can do it for pop-ups. You can just physically call people. These are low cost things. What I often find is people don't mobilize themselves unless they have the tools or they hire more people. But don't think in that way. Think about the end solution you're trying to get to. You're trying to speak to your customers. There are more ways to do that than hiring a UX researcher. There's more ways to do that than investing in fancy tools. You could simply just send an email or send a pop-up on every single transaction to get feedback.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Johnny. Also, there are certain